We live in horrible times. I mean, terrible things are happening on every front. Sometimes the outrage you almost can't contain the sense of outrage. Everything from families being separated and the callousness of our criminal justice system. I mean, I read police shootings and I shudder at some of the stories that I see. Treatment of women, treatment of children, our foreign policy and the damage we've done in so many countries in the world, beginning at the beginning of this century with the Iraq War, all the way through, an unraveling of the Middle East. And sometimes you think that it just couldn't get worse, but you know it can. You also think to yourself, it's never been this bad. Well, I want to offer a corrective note. It actually was worse, and it's actually better today. If you think about the last century, women couldn't vote. Millions of African Americans lived under Jim Crow and worse. There were thousands of lynchings in the first part of the last century. Europe talks about Arabs as if they're savages brutalizing each other. And yeah, there are grotesque civil wars unfolding in the Arab world today. In just 3 decades, Europe killed 50 million of its own people in 2 world wars. Do not forget that. It wasn't just the Holocaust, it was the Holocaust. A criminal enterprise of the cruelest and worst order. But the bombings of cities and the strangulation of peoples was continent-wide and done twice in 30 years. 50 million dead. That doesn't even count the tens of millions who died at the hands of Europe in colonial enterprises in Asia, Africa, and our own benevolent behavior in Central and South America. And in our own country, 140,000 plus Japanese Americans carted off into concentration camps, property stolen, jobs denied, their entire livelihoods erased. That happened just in the last century. And what happened about it? We forgot it. We forgot it as if it didn't happen, but it did. The difference today is not that there's more suffering in the world. The difference is we know it. We are more conscious and aware of the suffering. So don't ever think we're worse. We just know more. And as a product of knowing more, we have the capacity to do more. You realize that just the concept of human rights, the concept of having a human rights movement is new. In my father's generation, human rights meant taking care of your village. Next village didn't even exist. They were like the Hatfields and McCoys, they were the enemy. Human rights is not your people. We now have movements for Darfur. We have movements for Yemen. We have movements for Central African Republic. We have movements for the Rohingya. Places that people didn't even know existed just 20 years ago. We are now shedding tears and organizing movements and raising money and doing work to help people we didn't even know existed. The Uyghurs in China, the foreign minister of the Uyghur movement is here with us tonight. There are 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. We didn't even know the Uyghurs existed, but we do now. We do now, and we have the capacity to do something about it. That puts us in a position that the humankind never was before. The capacity to know the world, feel the suffering of the world, and do something about it. And so why I love Gibran and this night is because in this world of darkness, we celebrate people who bring light into the darkness, who make a difference. People like Lise Doucette who tell their stories, who get under the skin of a war and teach us about the life that's breathing under. People like Amal who give voice to the refugees. If you haven't heard her before, and many of you probably haven't, there's a song, first one I heard her sing, Kadesh, it's about refugees. It is the most evocative and almost suffering song about the plight of refugees worldwide. It's beautiful. It needs to be heard. And she sings it everywhere. She sings about freedom. She sings about Palestinians. She gives voice to the voiceless. And then there's Gus, who's been doing God's work for generations now. Like me, we're old, Gus. We can talk generations. And struggling to make a difference in people's everyday lives, whether it's the folks in New Orleans, the folks in South Africa, the people in Palestine, or the people in your own backyard, making an enormous difference in our lives. And Ray sees the enormous gratitude we have to have for what we see happening. I mean, I sometimes become inconsolable when I see children ripped from parents. That is so painful to even witness, but knowing that you were there on the front line, dealing with those issues every day, makes us prouder of who we are and makes us feel, as you said, we're in it for the long haul. We're going to make a difference. We're going to change this around. And Miriam, one of my favorite little passages in the Bible is Jesus says, those who would lead must first serve. Miriam was a leader because she was a servant to the community. In so many ways, big and small, she served us and she led us. And she gave us an example. When the community was rife with all kinds of internal problems, as communities often are, Miriam was the one who brought people together and who served as a healer. And so I think that, to me, the idea of celebrating people who bring light to darkness is what I want this night to be about. And I'm so thankful you're here to feel this light and the warmth that it brings. And I hope you leave with the sense that, as bad as it feels, with all that's happening here and abroad, that we are actually making progress and doing better. We are going to be a better species. We're going to be a better country. We're going to be a better humanity because of the work that's being done than we ever were before. Families were being separated generations ago. Nobody did anything about it. Nobody did anything. Nobody lifted a finger for the Japanese in concentration camps. But when the Muslim ban happened, people almost spontaneously went to airports in cities where there were somebody was telling me about an airport in Indiana where there were no people from abroad coming in. They just gravitated to the airport and welcomed any dark-looking person who came in. Because they felt bad and they wanted to do something good. And that's what increased consciousness does. It gives you the sense that you can do something good, you must do something good, and therefore you do something good. So thank you all for what you do. And we want to emulate what you do because you show us the way to be better every day. Thank you so much.